Hello and welcome to another Lord of the Rings Rise to War video. I'm the player who plays as the King Under the Mountain, and today I'm going to be talking through Gandalf the White, his role in the new meta, and potentially do we still need Gandalf the White in a formation. I'll go through the skills, I will go through theory crafted on builds, because I think there's a few schools of thought on the builds. Talk about the unique a little bit, talk about roleplay very, very briefly, and then mainly talk about NRP, I think, because I am now an NRP player. I think roleplay wise, it's a pretty obvious answer. NRP, it's probably not so obvious, but we'll kind of get to that conclusion at the end. So, start by going through skills and why he's been important since the start of 2.0. So, before the changes to abilities and points from the update in September, realistically, around about Respect 10, you were talking about filling 2 trees and getting a little bit in here. I think it was 2 trees and a 5. So I personally used to run him as full White Council, and this is one of the main skills in the game where people use him. Full allied formations receive 18% less damage from the first 5 hits taken, effect modified by focus. If your focus stat's high enough, that can get as high as 70%. It's pretty impressive, to be honest, and we'll come on to that when we talk about builds and his importance in the new meta. At level 5 it increases to 6, and at level 10 it increases to 7 durations. Now I think that's only outmatched by Falcon's, which is obviously race specific, which I'm pretty sure is 8 hits, not 7. I will check it in a minute just to make sure I'm not talking complete twaddle. His other main skill that people have been using him for, and I've seen some schools of thought around running him as damage with these 2 trees instead of this one, or that one full if you're Respect 10 and this one half full. I get it. For me, this was another one of his primary skills because it was flat. You know, it was first 3 rounds, damage received by 2 enemy formations plus 25% at level 10. It increased to 4 rounds by level 5, and then it targets 3 formations by level 10. For me, this was one of his most important skills. Both of these were, to be honest, and what made him pretty much the S tier meta sort of person that he was. If you were high enough respect, you could get some damage out of him with one of these trees. I personally, because I ran him more of a support, I ran him with this because I felt the minus 10 defense was better than what I'd get from the 5 points here, which was plus 5 focus. I can see why people run this for the stun, because that 25% chance of stun is pretty good, to be honest, every couple of rounds. And like I say, you're only getting additional damage here. So if you were going to run him as a damage dealer, you would just focus on these 3 trees personally. But for me, I still think he's more of a support. His relic kind of helps out his kit. It deals with a little bit of White Council itself. I probably wouldn't be fully refining this, I guess. And you might see now in the new meta, because of the way that things are, with people running evil a little bit more, you may see some orcs again with people dropping Bjorn. So this could become a thing again, which, you know, it's a good unique, and I think he's one of the people that no matter what roles you got on the strengthening, you'd be fairly okay with, or at least he's got 3 of the 4. I mean, unit attack's not really going to help what you're doing with him. But the other 3 are pretty good for what you try and do, particularly the focus. And to be honest, command, I like the fact that he's got command on mine. And we're going to talk through, I suppose, the 2 standard schools of thought. I will just check Falcon, because otherwise I won't forget about that if I can find Falcon in here. Pretty sure his Thrain's Guard is 8. 8 increases. So he's the only one who's got more of those sort of skills. So anyway, we're not on him today. We're on Gandalf the White. So the old meta formation was Gandalf the White, Bjorn, Dane, and of course Sauron in NRP. I'm going to briefly touch on roleplay. Not that I've played it for a while, but I still think you will be looking at Gandalf the White, Dane, possibly Gimli instead of Bjorn, but I don't see the purpose in it in roleplay. You would stick with Bjorn for me anyway. And Gil Galad. It hates me to say it. The Rise of Gil is probably another video that I'm going to do, and it's going to really pain me to do. I'll probably choke like Gollum 7,000 times during the video, but I have to accept that he has risen back to some sort of form of glory. particularly with the changes that they've done to season starts. I think it'll be really important for that and an elf start going forward, but that's a different thing. So in roleplay, I don't really think there is much of an option to replace Gandalf the White. You might try and run maybe a third DD, like a Gimli or something, but there isn't really a need to. So I kind of feel like the roleplay meta is likely to stay the same. So as far as it goes for justification of picking him in a roleplay team, for me, there isn't really an argument to not pick him in a roleplay team. NRP, I think, is a little bit different. So if you take the meta from before, from an NRP team, it was Dane, Bjorn, Sauron, Gandalf the White. And I think if you're at Kraken level now, from the reports that I've seen, you will get away with Gandalf the White, Gil, Dane, and Sauron, which I get it. I don't think it's going to work for everyone, because unless you've got quite a high level Dane, you're not going to put out enough damage. And if you get stunned in the wrong rounds, again, you're going to have Dane in all sorts of bother against people who've got more damage. So for me, that's probably... it's not quite there for me yet, and I get there's a counter meta to that also. So I always think if something's classed as the meta, it shouldn't really have a counter meta, but there you go. But sticking on track, we're here to talk about Gandalf the White predominantly. So in that current formation, which is the NRP one from before, you had Dane, Gandalf the White, Sauron, Bjorn. And there's 2 scores of 4 around his gear. I kind of run something that's just over 200 focus, which also has some troop defense, because I quite like to run him, as I've sort of shown you before. Not necessarily for damage, but for support, and I'm hoping to get the damage from a Bjorn or a Dane. Or a Gimli now, I guess, or even in NRP, your Shadows, those kind of people. So for me, Gandalf's role is very much a support. I also get the School of Thought, whereby you will look at him for damage. So particularly now that it respect 10-ish, or if you're at Zenith levels in particular, I think you can look at Gandalf for damage, and you can invest more heavily in these skills. But you'll see things like Obsidian Dagger and the Fine Smoking Pipe here, just so you can kind of max that focus. For me, the difference between the two, I feel this is more rounded for your formation, because you're looking at some command and you're going to mitigate some damage. He's going to take some hits for you, while also protecting you with a fairly decent White Council, providing he's quicker than Sauron. And that kind of leads nicely into where I'm at really with it in this new meta and whether he's needed. So because of the change to the Deceiver, we'll just go into Sauron. This no longer happens pre-battle. So that's basically stopped him from being able to steal the skills. But because of this here with the enemy, whereby this now scales off the focus stat, and I haven't seen too many people try to build Sauron at anything less than a tank yet, so I'll be interested to see how that happens. But this is quite a large reduction if you're looking at your stats for White Council and things like that. So for me, it's important that your Gandalf the White is still, if you're going to use him, faster than Sauron. Because otherwise 15% off this, my White Council's not really great. And obviously it scales. So if you're talking about 280 focus, your 15% off 280 focus is obviously more of a gap than mine is, and you're losing a lot of value in that formation, because likely if you are high focus, you're likely to have low unit defense. So the schools of thought on it are protect your White Council a little bit more against, you've got White Council to mitigate more damage early, whereas I personally with this kind of build would have more unit defense to mitigate damage over 10 rounds, for example, and more command to do so. And the reason why Gandalf the White's kind of coming up in talk of whether he's needed in this sort of meta formation, and it rightly or wrongly, I'm just here to sort of say it like it is, really. So is because of the rise of people like Saruman. So Saruman, due to the changes they made after PBE, has got this Head of White Council skill. And for the first 5 rounds, he deals 150% focus damage once to 3 enemies. But if you go to level 5, he does it twice, but it's half the damage, which you would say, okay, that's a bit weird. But actually, it just strips White Council, which is kind of ironic as the Head of White Council, but there you go. So if you've got the high focus build, and no Gil-galad, for example, your White Council, say you're facing an evil team with Shadow and Saruman, your White Council ain't lasting very long, so your 280 focus is kind of worthless unless you're getting some damage out of him at the back end. But you're not really protecting your formation as a tank or from White Council, which is one of the main skills, so that makes it difficult. If you also run into a Gil-galad, for example, again, this skill here, say if, and this is only theorising, these 3 targets could all be the 3 that are being protected by Gil-galad. So you're getting at least 2 rounds of this, likely 2 rounds to be honest, as long as you keep your formation slow, whereby most of these hits aren't even going to land. So again, against the wrong formation now, Gandalf the White is fairly useless as a focus level thing. I mean, it's a bit harsh to say fairly useless, but you'll still get some damage from your damage trees. But White Council can now be stripped even easier than it was before. And with Gil-galad being used a lot more, White Ride is not actually as powerful as it was. And this is kind of why I'm just bringing it up in discussion. But for me personally, and I hate to say it, so say if you're using a formation with a Gil, the theory is that you'll probably put something like a Swan Knight on a Gil or a Cataphract or a Troll or whatever it is, some kind of taunt unit just to take some normal attacks away from your formation, just in case it gets through your elf. So you're going to use Kingly Kin, which for the first 2 rounds, alpha units in 3 allied formations have 60% evade and 15. I mean, this is kind of a little bit wasted because the likelihood is it's not going to go through anyway. And elves are made out of paper, but that's not for me to talk about today. But then at level 10, this increases to 70%, which, I get it, it's 7 out of 10 attacks is not going to hit, which is pretty impressive, really. So if we head back to that and we look at how that build works. So say if you're running, and this is why the new meta formation, I guess, works so well. Your Dane is still putting out serious damage, particularly with a high refine unique. He's not taking hits for the first 2, possibly 3 rounds, depending on how slow he is and obviously the Kingly Kin skill. You've got your Sauron debuffing with the enemy in particular. So again, you're taking less damage. You have Gil getting you with the evasion, and then once the evasion stops, this is the theory behind your high focus Gandalf the White and where it works if it's with Gil-galad. Because if he's with Gil-galad, this skill will hit as long as you're not hitting a Gil-galad, which helps you early for damage. And this skill protects your formation probably into round 4, just due to the how it works. So if it's protecting into round 4, you're hitting a Bjorn where the max damage is Skin Changer. There is a distinct chance that some of your formations are still going to be protected by White Council when this happens. And some other little things as well. You might get really lucky. If your Sauron's sort of slow enough, you could potentially Madden Bjorn, for example. Which again would be pretty helpful. But it's that whole thing of if you've got Gil in the formation, Gandalf the White I still think is definitely a must, because your White Council is going to last into those later rounds, protect you a little bit more. Say even if you're fighting a Shadow and Saruman formation, which even with Gil-galad's evade, they're still going to hit you 3 out of them 10 times, and there's so many attacks early doors, they are going to strip your White Council a little bit faster. That's just a fact. But you're still likely to have some protection into round 3 and round 4, even with that formation, unless you get some really unlucky RNG. So for me, in that meta formation with Gil-galad, I think Gandalf the White still has a massive place, and I don't think you'd be able to do it without him, to be perfectly honest. Mainly because these formations that have worked have also then got some damage output, which the 60-65k kind of mark is somewhere between 40 to 65, 70k, depending on your Zenith levels and things like that in your gear. It still works, and you're getting enough damage output with your Dane doing 220k. I don't think there's any doubt that Dane is still the best damage dealer in the game, but it's just an interesting school of thought. So in that new meta formation, which I think, by the way, is only Kraken level, I don't think you can run it below that. It works, and your Gandalf should stay. But there is kind of a school of thought where if you're slightly lower spender, and it's kind of a spin-off from that formation, which is classed as the meta formation, loses to a full evil formation with trolls. And that formation is something like a shadow, because it still strips White Council fairly fast. You had Sauron as your debuffer, and I would presume for that to work properly, he's got to be pretty quick, because you need him to be quicker than the Gandalf to bring White Council the focus down and things like that. You've got your Saruman again, stripping White Council. And then the last part of that formation was Sestara, which I don't actually have, so I'd probably have to try Scalhelm, and I think I'd still get okay results. Where is Sestara? Just so I can show you where he is. I've clearly missed him somewhere along the way. I don't know how they filter these now. Sestaro, here he is. And it's because this Nazgul skill, but he should still be quick enough. It's still, and some of his other skills in his kit with the focus damage breaking through what will be a high defense build, I would think, in that sort of meta formation. Gets through enough damage, and because of the counter of trolls versus the likelihood of someone using the Gil and using Bow Knights, for example, which seems to be the new meta, you counter the damage and you pretty much win the fight. Scalehelm, I think, is very similar. The only issue that Scal has against that Gil formation, and this isn't Gandalf the White again, so we're saying which is the most important part of this. The issue that Scal has is something like the unique is likely to miss due to the evasion, which is a big part of her kit. You'll still get the Nazgul damage and some other damage because you'll be quicker than the Gil-galad, and the Gandalf, I would imagine. But it's just you're not quite utilising the kit correctly, which is why Gil-galad's a problem for Scalehelm. And most other commanders, if we're being honest. So again, just to talk that through, let's go down a level then, because in that level you still need that Gandalf, even though you can use... Say you're going back to the old meta formation of Dane, Gandalf, Sauron and Bjorn. There is still a school of thought which you could replace your Gandalf with a Witch King, for example. And you can run your Witch King with trolls. And you are modifying this basically debuff. So you've got 2 debuffs in this formation then. You've got no White Council, so your mitigation is coming from purely debuffing your enemies. You probably would run Witch King with a large unit anyway, which is obviously helpful. And he's Stun and Madness immune at level 10. This scales quite nicely, to be honest. So it's a decent debuff when you mix it with Sauron. I would make Sauron, if I was going to do this build, faster than Witch King, because Witch King's debuff is flat, Sauron's is a percentage. So you kind of want your Sauron to hit first. Say if it was 100 and your Sauron's taking 15% off, he takes 15 off. Your Witch King then with this going up to say 27 then takes a further 27 off. Whereas if you did it the other way around, it would be a lower percentage, if that makes sense. You'd still get some early damage from Nazgul. And you'd get early damage from Lord of the Nazgul as well. So this would probably likely miss, including the stun, which is a little bit unfortunate if you're against that Gil formation. But if you replace Gandalf the White with that Witch King and still ran Dane and Bjorn, there's a chance you would still do okay. I personally think you'd do a lot better if you're running Dane, Witch King, Sauron, and probably Saruman, so that you're using the Head of the White Council skill to sort of break through. If you wanted to go one step further than that and go really berserk, it's kind of in the same theory of the Sestaro build that counters it. You could run trolls, because your key in that formation is to try and counter a lot of the different elements. So you'd probably have a fast Sauron to try and get the Gandalf the White in that formation down. But then you want everything else to be slow, because you want Gil-galad's evade to end in the end of round 2, really, before you start attacking in round 3. So you could probably run something like a Dane, Shadow, Saruman and Sauron build. And again, that would probably do quite nicely against that sort of meta build. And even the old build, to be honest, I think it'd still do quite well against a Dane, Bjorn, Gandalf and Sauron build. It does need some testing. It's just theory crafting to see how important Gandalf now is. Obviously, with the reset to respects, there are options as well, and I know I talked through this the other day. Gandalf the White in particular, is one of the main options that you can actually grab respect out of and do quite well with. So using the Ascension system to your advantage, like I kind of showed the other day, if you did want to up your Gandalf, there are actually quite a lot of options. Eowyn was an option, and also Theoden was an option, I believe. I've already done the Eowyn option, so I now have 40 items for Gandalf the White by replacing them with just random ones, just to help you sort of up your account a little bit. So what you can do, I won't do it this one because I really don't want to up Radagast, is I can use 40 random items here, 100 random items here, and I can get these 40 items out of here, which will be more useful than trying to trade in at a third if I was trying to build Radagast. There are a lot of options to do that for Gandalf the White. I think it was Theoden, it might even be Irma, to be honest. Irma, and I think it's all the Rohirrim commanders, and Eowyn. So you can potentially, depending on what state your account's in, get 120 Gandalf the White vouchers, which will help you get somewhere towards the Zenith levels, I would think. And from there, you were probably looking at your Gandalf the White for damage as well as mitigation, which I think is a good spot to be in personally. My kind of conclusion is I do think he's still very important to a formation. I think there are ways around not using him, and I'm quite looking forward to trying out builds with Mouth of Sauron, for example. So Mouth of Sauron, probably something like Scalhelm and Witch King, or Saruman. It's probably more likely to be Saruman and Witch King, to be honest. I don't really like Scalhelm too much. She's annoyed me over this time. And the theory there is that you are debuffing attack with Mouth of Sauron. I'll just show that it's slightly off topic, but if you run into this Gandalf formation, it would work quite nicely, I think. I just need to get my Mouth of Sauron leveled up a little bit. With his kit now, if it's physical damage, he's kind of taking the physical damage down with this sort of attack on both sides. So again, against that Gandalf formation, he's likely to do quite well. So with me using focus damage, it's not going to come off. My attack stat isn't bothering me, and probably use some troops which are alchemists or something on one of them, like a Witch King, and some follow up, just so I can actually get some sort of elemental damage through. So I think that'd be quite a niche, quite a cool option that I'm hoping to try. Other options as well, apart from Gandalf, and I don't think it'd work as well, but you can still get some mitigation. You could use your Frodo, for example, with Great Beasts instead of Gandalf. You've just got to hope he tanks enough. If I'm being brutally honest, again, if you run dwarves these days, I actually think Falcon's kit, with it now being aligned, is almost at the kit of Gandalf. I think the only thing that really separates it is White Rider, but if you're going to miss half those attacks anyway, it's a little bit wasted. With Thrain's Guard now sort of scaling off command, and having one extra instance, this can't be affected by a faster Sauron. So whereas Sauron can debuff focus, he can't debuff command. So this skill now actually cannot be touched by Sauron at all, which is a massive improvement. So if you do run dwarves, I don't know how many people, we'll have to see in seasons, are still going to run Guardians, for example. I might have to because of the amount I fight. I don't know how many people are going to be able to move to medium and large units if they're actually fighting properly, to be honest, because I don't think anyone ever has the resource or time to fight properly. That's just my opinion. I'm not sure if it's going to be right. So again, another option to replace Gandalf is probably a Falcon for that reason. Like I say, Mouth of Sauron might work quite well. Personally, I will probably run Sauron with something, whether it be Gandalf the White or whatever it might be, to try and counteract that methodology. But as far as it goes for me at this moment in time, Gandalf the White is still necessary in a formation. I just do think there are other options to run as commanders, which are probably just not as successful. The counter argument to that is that full evil formation, which is the Shadow, Sistaro or Scalhelm, Sauron, and Saruman, which was beating that meta formation, but it's very, very sort of marginal, I think, where you look at it, and sort of a lot. If you're playing percentages, he is still a fantastic commander who can do some good work, particularly, like I say, at the Zenith levels where you're getting some damage out of him. So that was kind of all I wanted to talk about today. There are options to replace him with, and I don't think you'll see too much difference in the results personally. Like I say, I do think Falcon's a great option now, particularly as a dwarf lover like I am. Gil is now a lot higher than what he was. I think a Gil Gandalf partnership, if you're using Gil, you have to use Gandalf. It's pretty nailed on that you're going to use the two, just because you extend the White Council so far. But yeah, other than that, I think there are options, and I think over time the meta might change a little bit. I think it's nice now that we're looking at commanders and building them in a couple of different ways rather than just one way. So that's good. But as always, if in doubt, always follow your nose.